Hello everybody. I didn't plan this video whatsoever, but something happened today whilst I was out at the shops that was very moving, very poignant and very worrying because from what I saw, from what happened to me or around me, I felt like this flickering idea of a caring, thoughtful society, the embers of that caring, thoughtful society was really dashed out from what I could see. And it has wider implications, but just listen to my story. Decide for yourself if it has wider implications or not. So today I went to a shop, just the supermarket, to get a few snacks and come out and do some reading because I recently bought the latest Islander magazine, produced by the Lotus Eaters, Carl Benjamin's outfit. And so I picked up a few snacks and lunch and things like that. And I just went up to the tills when suddenly I heard this thud behind me. And I looked behind me, and about 5 meters away from me, an elderly man was just lying on the ground, his head on the side, just staring outwards. His glasses had just fallen a little bit forward before him, and suddenly this pool of blood started to form around him, around his sort of eye socket kind of area. And in that moment, I just sort of froze a little bit, and I looked around me, and I noticed a few staff from this particular supermarket run over. One of them with some tissues to put it under his head, and they were getting around him, and they were trying to talk to him, work out if he was breathing, alive, things like that. And really, without any hesitation, I would say, except for the hesitation of kind of being frozen in shock at seeing what was before me, I just went ahead and called 999, called the emergency services, just immediately said, ambulance, please. Tried to explain to them where I was, what location, but I also told them that I didn't know the man, didn't know anything about him, didn't really understand what was happening, except he seemed to be moving and breathing and to some degree talking. But the real point of this story is that when I saw this guy on the floor, apart from the shock of having seen what was around me, I had this very brief look around, and I didn't really see anybody else concerned except for the people who were staff at this supermarket. Everybody else, I'm not even sure if 95% of the people in the shop saw, even went to look or acknowledge what had happened. They were just getting on with their shopping. But there was also people who saw it and didn't seem to want to get involved whatsoever, kind of had this face as if they didn't see it. And there may have been a few people who seemed somewhat concerned, but really didn't show very much. And there was this other aspect that there were these people who were like, because he fell at the start of this aisle, like the shopping aisle, and he was near like the section where you buy like coffee beans or filter coffee or whatever. And he had fallen in this location, and there were people still trying to get a hold of the products that he was in the way of, and there was people just like trying to walk around him, and people were saying like, no, go the other way. Like there's a guy lying on the floor with his head into the hard tiles, pooling around him, like put on the gloves of these people, and they're still just trying to like get a hold of their coffee or walk around him as if it doesn't really mean anything. I was just shocked that I saw this body or person. He wasn't dead, but you know what I mean. Saw this person. I looked around, and I could see that nobody else was doing the role of calling the emergency services. So straight away, without any hesitation, I got out my phone, and then I said to the person, like, it seems a bit stupid in hindsight, but I said, should I call 999? I said it to the person who was like looking after the man. And I kind of said it, I don't know, like I was going to call them anyway, but I just figured in case there was another staff member who was already calling, I guess. And also there was a bit of a shock where like when you come to contact with a real life situation that has some real weight to it, like something that matters, you do sometimes, if you're not one of these like kind of Uber people, like I don't know, like your Julius Caesars or your Alexander the Greats or Napoleons or whatever, you do get this feeling that's kind of like, should I get involved? But I went over that right away, just asked very simply, should I call the ambulance? Like, just because in case they'd called already. No hesitation, called 999 ambulance, need an ambulance, blah, blah, blah. And, but yeah, this comes back to the thing which was extremely shocking for me. It was the fact that I felt like it was the staff members and me and the person who was like the victim of this fall just surrounded by a sea of uncaring faces, uncaring people, people who were so focused on their own thing. It was either, I don't know what's happening, which to some degree I can't knock that too much. I'm not going to get involved with what's happening. I'm going to pretend it's not happening. Or what's happening appears to be in some way resolved, So, can we think about me, please? Can I get my coffee, please? Can I get around this elderly gentleman, please? And I just felt, yeah, awash in a sea of uncaring masses, uncaring faces. And I will say there was one or two people. There was this other man, like this other gentleman who seemed a bit older than me, who was sort of kind of stood near me, kind of looked around as if he might be able to help. Kind of. I don't know if he said, "Can I help?" I can't remember. I was on the phone, right? But good on him, because even if there's something that I kind of want to say here is that even if you know that you can't help, there's something very communal and very binding about being like, "Can I help?" Whether you're like a doctor or something, or, you're a specialist in first aid, so you can give help, or if you're just a bystander who knows nothing about the situation, nothing about first aid, nothing about anything, just kind of going like, is there anything you need me to do? Can I hold something? Can I call someone? Is there anything? And I saw this, as I said, these masses of faces doing nothing, not wanting to be involved, not keeping their head down. And I was just the guy who just had to go, I'm calling the ambulance. And there was even a guy who walked over, like, kind of, he was a staff member, kind of was gesturing to me, kind of saying, right, without saying, are you calling the ambulance? And I was just like ambulance, and he was like, good. And when finally when finally the emergency responder didn't need, like, the call anymore, because I'd passed my phone over to a staff member just because they had better context on the matter. Once I got my phone back, it was like, the three staff members all look at me and they're all in unison. They're like, thank you very much. And I felt like, why am I the person who steps up to do that? And the immediate answer, of course, is like, you just have to be that person. That's life. But I had this quite kind of earth-shattering idea in my head that was quite morose, quite morbid, but is just an essence of life. Is that, God forbid, if that person becomes me one day, if I'm the person who falls in the shop, if I'm the person who takes a fall outside, if I'm the person in the hospital bed in a serious emergency, I want to be rushed at and surrounded by people who want to help, even if it means that a professional has to shoo them away. You know, I want to be in the position where people are bending hand over fist to help me. Like, even if I am a stranger, it would be nice if I wasn't a stranger, if I was some famous figure or some, like, important part of the community, and so people were bending over backwards to help me. That's nice. But even if just because I'm a human being walking around, and I don't know everybody around me, but I'm sure as heck I'd get along with a lot of them. Like, could I be that person? So, the disturbing thought that there's this man falls over in this shop, just staring out, blood pooling around his head, like, sort of making noises. And I saw him even, like, a minute or two later, he did this, like, shocked thing, where he must have come to, like, his body must have done the factory reset. And he kept being concerned about his shopping, and the staff were trying to tell him, mate, the shopping you're trying to buy is not important here. And I just thought, like, he's just this one man alone facing into, like, one of these sort of sections of the shop with, like, these three staff members around him. And if he'd been sat the other way, he would have known I was trying to help him, at least on the phone. And I just thought, like, what if that was me? Like, if I'd fallen down and I was in a lot of pain, sure, maybe the most important thing is my safety, yes. But there's this latent idea of, like, if I was surrounded by many strangers who were concerned for me, how much more would that mean in the critical point of life where life meets death? The point on the prism where life meets death. And I had this, and I was walking out the shop because I wasn't planning on making a video. I didn't bring my video making stuff out. I was just going to read my copy of Islander. But I went straight home and I picked up all this stuff because I needed to tell someone, I needed to say something. Because, as I said at the start of this video about that ember or a flicker of society, of a communal idea, communality, or whatever word it would be, communality, I don't know. I'm not talking communism, I'm just talking a sense of community. Wasn't there, when I was a young boy, well, is there a flicker of a memory in my head of where something would happen and the people around would be hand over fist trying to do everything they could to help, surrounded by helpful people? And thankfully, I have been in moments where, for instance, I was in a sort of like a kind of a road traffic accident, which didn't go too badly in the end, but people came out of their houses to help me, because they heard what happened on the street. And I'm not saying it's entirely gone. That's why I say a flicker or an ember. But is society projecting towards being uncaring? And is it just the places like London or the south of England that are like this, and the north of England and the rest of the world are all cool or whatever. All helpful. I don't know, but I just had this sense that is there an atomization of society, or is there just a sudden influx of selfish people, or am I the fool here? Is it just there's a man on his phone and the staff members, I'm just going to ignore it? Was that the right thing? Am I getting uppity over nothing? And I don't have any particular quotes or anything insightful that I can pull from society or anything like that, or wider culture or wider books. I just made this video because there was something strange to me about being a caring person with 3 other staff members, but surrounded by a sea of just uncaring people. And I thought, what if that person sat down with their head bloody blown as me? Are we projecting towards a society in which no one cares for nothing except themselves? Or did we just get an unlucky thing? Or is it just the nature of where I live? And so part of it is kind of, there's answers you'll never get, and sitting around and thinking forever won't give you any answers. But all you can be is the person who decides, no, I am going to help out in that situation. And I don't think it can be like a Christ-like thing where literally every single person you help them, you perform miracles, you bend over backwards. Maybe that's your way, you know, maybe you're like a major volunteer in the area, but is it just as simple as when, you know, when the rubber hits the road and that critical situation comes about? Am I going to be that person who reaches out and calls the ambulance or calls the police or tries to trip up the thief, you know? Even though we're all whinging online of like, oh, getting involved is how you get sued or whatever. Like, what a narcissistic thing. You know, we know when the rubber hits the road. We know what that feeling is. We've seen these things happen. So at some point, we can't ask the government or whatever for like more bobbies on the beat, more ambulance drivers, more, you know, people who know first aid or whatever. I don't know. There's just a point where we just have to do that. We just have to be that person. And so for me, as I said, I'm not some Christ-like figure where I'm doing everything right. I'm holier than thou. But I had to, in that situation, I could have turned back to my shopping and I could have just scanned it and walked out. I could have done that. I could have joined the sea. I could have been in the sea. And in fact, I think I've been in that sea of people. And I may end up in that sea once again in the future. But in this moment, I decided not to be that person. And I think it was mostly instinct. But there was an aspect of just being like, I'm going to be that person. And I'm not saying it's a major thing. You know, I didn't perform CPR. You know, I didn't like take down like a group of robbers or something. It wasn't a big thing. I just called the ambulance. But it was more just the spirit of the event, the feeling of the event, really, more than anything. So I think I'll leave it there. And it's just a question for you. As much as you might be watching videos like mine that's somewhat political or ethical or something, opinionated, are you going to be that person who actually says, I'm going to get involved and do something? Or are you just going to be the person who speculates on the idea of doing something and never does anything? But I think I'll leave it there. So, yeah, I just made this video impromptu. If you want to support the Wrens, as I kind of put it, subscribe to the channel, because I just want to be raw, just want to be real, don't want to screw around. You know, I just want to talk about things that you might find interesting. I tend to do deeper subject matter than this, but the format's fairly similar if you enjoy it. So, if you want to support the Wrens, subscribe, leave a comment and a like, it's always nice. I don't know if I'm taking donations. If I am, then it's on the screen. But thank you very much for watching.